Okay, thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Jenny Kowecki on NCARB's Marketing and Communications team, and I'll be your moderator today. With me are two of our staff architects, our Manager of Outreach, Emily Anderson, and our Senior Manager of Examination, Maintenance, and Security, Nick Respecki. Emily and Nick are going to share information about how to navigate the path to licensure, including details about the experience program and the exam. And then we'll have time for a Q&A. We'll answer any questions that you have through the chat tool, or not the chat, the Q&A tool. Before we get started, Emily and Nick, why don't you tell our attendees about yourselves and a little bit about your own journey to licensure? Emily, we'll start with you.
Hi, as mentioned, my name is Emily Anderson. I am licensed to practice architecture in the state of Florida, and I had a little bit of a non-traditional path to get to licensure. I started off and I wanted to be an architect since I was 11 years old, and did my undergrad in architecture, and then moved to Florida and was working in a firm and didn't particularly want to go back at that point to get my grad degree. So I said, well, maybe I'm not going to be an architect and I'm just going to work at an architecture firm. And eventually it got to the point where anything that I was putting up as an excuse to not finish was just an excuse. And so I came back and I finished. I went back to grad school. I finished AXP through the AXP portfolio method because I hadn't ever reported my experience along the way. And then I completed my exams while I was in grad school through an IPAL program. So I took some twists and turns, but I got there eventually.
Yeah, I guess I'll do a quick intro for myself. Thanks, Emily, Jenny. My name's Nick Respecki. I am on the examination team here at NCARB. Been with NCARB nearing 10 years. Over the course of those 10 years, spent some of my time working on the sort of development of the exam. And now I've sort of migrated over and I'm spending my time on maintenance-related activities with the exam, and then also focusing on security aspects of the exam. And I know you all will be shocked when I say this, but believe it or not, like Emily, I knew I wanted to be an architect at a young age, and I, enjoyed art class, drafting class. You always hear the story about Legos. I was also a Legos kid. And shockingly, I wasn't playing with Legos thinking one day I want to work in the regulation of architecture at NCARB. I was not thinking that. Actually, like many of you, I wanted to go on to design buildings, magnificent buildings. I still remember I grew up in a really small town in Michigan, and I remember for me, traveling to a big city was traveling to Detroit, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Chicago. And I remember being young and seeing just the size, the scale of the buildings. And for me, that was really inspiring. And so that really drove me to want to become an architect. So my path was a little bit different than Emily. I followed a very traditional path. So like I mentioned, I grew up in a very small town in northern Michigan, went down to the state of Indiana and went to Ball State University, did 4-year undergraduate there, Bachelor of Science in Architecture. After that 4-year degree, I stuck around at Ball State and did the 2-year Master of Architecture, which at Ball State, that's their NAB accredited program. So I was in Muncie, Indiana for 6 years. At that point, when I graduated, I had an opportunity to work at a corporate firm doing healthcare out in the DC area. So I found my way over to DC, working at that firm. And when I started there, I was logging my experience hours. I had some done through internship while in school. And then I started testing not long after, taking the architect registration examination. I was about maybe 2 years removed from graduating when I started that. Did that at the same time as I was logging my experience hours, and then ultimately earned my license to practice architecture in the District of Columbia in 2013. So Emily and I will be talking about it throughout this webinar today. We had very different paths, but both of us are an architect, and I think that's really important to remember as we go through this webinar today. There are multiple ways to earn that license to practice, and one path is not better than another path. They ultimately both end with a license to practice architecture. So Jenny, Emily, that's a short intro on me.
All right, thank you both so much. So before we dive into the Q&A, I believe the two of you have a short presentation you're going to share with us. For our viewers, if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them in the Q&A tool, and then we'll get to them once we're done with the presentation. So take it away.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Okay, so we do have a few slides before we open up for Q&A. And many of you joining here this afternoon, I'm sure you're familiar with what NCARB is, what our mission is, what our goals are as an organization, but we're going to start here just talking a little bit about NCARB, and I think this will help put some context to what we're going to be describing here in this webinar today. So first thing that's really important to understand as you all plan out your future to become a licensed architect is NCARB does not issue anyone a license to practice architecture. The states you see up on the screen and the jurisdictions you see up on the screen, those are the entities that will grant you a license to practice architecture. So in my case, the District of Columbia granted me or issued me a license to practice. Emily, Florida, correct? You're licensed in Florida? Florida issued Emily a license to practice architecture. There is actually no national license to practice architecture across the country. So although I'm licensed in DC, I can't just go over the Potomac River and begin practicing in Virginia. I can't do that because it's regulated at the state level. So really important to understand that regulated at the state level, the states also set requirements for licensure or jurisdictions. Now, all these jurisdictions, there are 55 total, they are members of NCARB, the National Council of Architectural Registration Board. So if you're scratching your head saying, okay, Nick, if I'm getting my license from the state, why in the world do I care about NCARB and what's NCARB's involvement in all of this? And you can think of NCARB as we are, yes, the membership organization for those licensing boards. And we also develop national programs, national models for the licensing boards to then adopt and use in the regulation of architecture within those borders. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you a couple examples. The Architectural Experience Program, which is accepted for the experience requirement in all 55 jurisdictions. That program is developed by NCARB and then offered to the state licensing boards to adopt to make it a requirement within their jurisdiction. So think of AXP as an NCARB program that's offered to the state licensing boards. The same thing can be said for the architect registration examination. That exam is developed by us at NCARB and then offered to our membership, the state licensing boards, to then use to regulate architecture within their borders. And in the case of the ARE, all 55 licensing boards have adopted the ARE as a requirement for licensure. So you can think of NCARB as we're sort of the overarching entity that helps facilitate licensure. So throughout your process of earning a license, you're going to be dealing with both us at NCARB and you're going to be dealing with your individual state licensing board. Regardless of where you go, Emily said she's licensed in Florida. I'm licensed in DC. Whether you're going to go to Missouri, Colorado, Michigan, Montana, the common thread across all 55 jurisdictions is there are basically three elements, for the most part, that have to be fulfilled to earn a license. Those states set an education requirement. So what do you have to do education-wise to earn a license within the jurisdiction? Well, out of the 55 boards, we know that I believe, Emily, roughly 38 require a degree from a NAB accredited program. However, the other 17 jurisdictions have various requirements as far as how you can complete your education. Experience program. That basically provides evidence to the state licensing boards that, yeah, I've worked in a firm and I understand my responsibilities as an architect, and I've built competencies in all of those responsibilities. And Emily will talk here in a second about the different tasks within the AXB. And then finally, the exam, that third sort of component, assesses you on that knowledge and says, can you provide evidence to the state licensing boards that you are competent to practice architecture within the border? So now, what does this mean for you all as you're mapping out your future as an architect? Really important to understand where you want to get a license because there is no national license. And then understand the requirements within that jurisdiction. So if you're interested in earning a license in New York, understand the requirements to earn a license in New York. If you want to earn a license in Indiana, understand the requirements to earn a license in Indiana. And luckily, NCARB has a fantastic tool that's on our website, the licensing requirements tool. Go and check it out right now. You can also Google search it or search through our website. I believe it's also on our homepage. What it allows you to do is to click on an individual state and find out the requirements that need to be fulfilled to earn a license within that jurisdiction. You can also filter by let's say you have a degree from a non-NAB accredited program, and you're thinking, well, what are those jurisdictions that don't require that education? You can select that in the map and then see those states as well too. So really important information as we go forward in this presentation today. Now I'm going to pass it over to Emily to talk about making a plan.
Yeah, so your first step to getting to this licensure goal is to track it, to make a plan. You've probably heard the cliche that failing to plan is planning to fail. Like, maybe not total failure, but it's at least going to take a little bit longer. So here's some steps that you can do along the way. Now, this is for any goal, but it applies to licensure. So if you've heard of SMART goals, make sure that your goals are specific, that they're measurable, that there's something you can take action on, that they're reasonable, and that they're timely, that you have some sort of time limit on them. And then break those down into, okay, maybe that's my big 10-year goal is licensure, but what are the milestones along that way? Share your goal with others, seek guidance on support. We're definitely going to talk about that today, and then track your progress and adjust as needed to continue your success. So if you could go to the next slide. So we've made that plan, and then we have kind of the expectation. We know that it's not going to go. We're not going to go straight from A to B and have nothing happen. And then in reality, life happens, and there's some twists and turns along the way, maybe some roadblocks, maybe some potholes, maybe some things you got to go around, over, under, through. And so making sure that you're planning ahead. Yes, everything isn't going to go exactly to that plan, but when you are planning ahead, you have strategies to deal with when those twists and turns come along, instead of being completely thrown or getting stuck in them. Next slide. So you don't want to do this alone. You definitely want some people along with you. So this is a concept that's been introduced to me a couple of times, so I wanted to share it with you all. That just like a nonprofit like NCARB has its board of directors, you as a person should have a board of mentors. And so we have some options up here. Now, these are just suggestions. This doesn't mean that you need to, like, if you don't have every single one of these people advising you in your life, then you're going to fail somehow. This is just a suggestion, but you definitely want your work supervisor as somebody who's supporting you and helping you through the process. But if that's the only person that you have, there are some perspectives that you might be missing. You might want somebody with similar affinities to you, somebody who looks like you, somebody who shares similar values, somebody who, you share religious or spiritual beliefs with. You might want somebody like that advising you along the way. Someone doing the career you want, somebody who is just ahead of you in the process, so they can tell you what's coming. And then also maybe somebody who's just behind you, so that not only you can be that someone just ahead of you for them, but then they can also mentor up and say what they're seeing coming from their perspective. Having people who work at your at other firms in your area, or connecting with people through your professional organizations, great. And stay in contact with those people in your school cohort, not just the people who went to architecture school with you, but the people who were in your Western civilization class or whatever, because honestly, those might someday be your clients, right? So keep in contact with them, keep those relationships built, and use them to your advantage. You don't have to do this alone. There's lots of people going through who can help you through. So we're going to talk about the Architectural Experience Program. Like we said, Nick and I did this in very different ways, but we both followed the same framework of needing to get broad areas of experience, needing to see when you're licensed to practice architecture in a U.S. jurisdiction, you're licensed to practice any kind of architecture out there. And so you want to have the broad range of experiences so that you can use your licensure as a platform to build any specializations you might go into later. So next slide. One of the mistakes, or maybe not mistakes, but one of the things that can slow people down with the architectural experience program is that they'll just kind of let it happen to them. And instead, like, they aren't making that plan. They're just saying, whatever work my firm gives me, that's the work I'll take. But there really is an advantage to making a plan and looking at what are all of those things that I need to do. What are all of the things I need to learn so that when I have that license, I'm competent to practice. I feel confident and comfortable practicing on my own, whether that's staying at the firm I'm at or going off and starting my own practice. So for each of the 6 experience areas, there is a page in our AXP guidelines that look like this. Up at the top, there'll be a description of what that area is, a summary of it. But I don't want you to stop there, because if you stop there, you're going to miss out on all the different options that you need to be looking at to really grow and develop as an architect. So underneath that, there's a list of tasks. And so this is just a sampling of the tasks that are under practice management: adhere to ethical standards and codes of professional conduct, comply with laws and regulations governing the practice of architecture, preparing proposals for services. All of those things are things that you need to be able to do as an architect. And so if you're just letting that happen to you, you might not get experience in this until much further along in the AXP process. You might be getting towards the end of the AXP process. And let's say for construction and evaluation, there's only so much of that your firm does. And so you want to have that sprinkled in throughout the process, not wait until the end. Because if you wait until the end, it's still going to be sprinkled throughout your workday or your work weeks, and it's going to extend that process further along. So make sure that you are stepping in and advocating for yourself to get all of those things covered, having a plan. And then when you have a plan to work on a particular section or task and the work isn't there, then you have a plan already set so that you can rework to overcome those, instead of just being like, well, I guess I won't get more practice management skills built until another 3 months from now. Keep working on it, keep advocating for yourself. And I'll hand it back over to Nick now.
Thank you, Emily. So you heard me briefly talk about the ARE at the beginning of this presentation. So ARE, short for Architect Registration Examination. And the one thing to know about the Architect Registration Examination is it is a national exam, meaning regardless of which jurisdiction you plan to get an initial license in, it's a requirement. Now, the good thing about it being a national exam, if you take it one time for the state of Nebraska, excellent. You don't have to take it again if you go to Texas or you go to Maine or you go to a different jurisdiction. It is the same exam, regardless of which state or jurisdiction you are pursuing initial licensure in, or regardless of which state you are actually or jurisdiction you are testing in. It's the same exam. It's required in all 55. The goal of this exam, and I mentioned it earlier, is to really assess your competency to practice architecture. Can you protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public within the jurisdiction you are pursuing an architecture license in? That's really the goal of this exam. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the divisions of the ARE, but I think it's important to note there are 6 divisions. And so Emily was talking earlier about planning. Part of sort of looking forward to earning a license in architecture is planning out not only how you're going to get your experience, what your education might be, but then also planning out how to tackle the exam. Which division do you take first? What's your cadence for taking the exams? How do the exams then align with your experience within a firm. So there's a lot to consider from the ARE standpoint when you start planning out how to successfully navigate it. Please, 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 as you plan it out, use the resources that NCARB has available on our website. And Emily's smiling there a little bit because we have at NCARB, I don't say this because I work at NCARB. I say this because if I was going through the process today, these resources they're excellent. And we have a lot of them. It's just starting with the guidelines. You see architect registration examination guidelines and you're thinking to yourself, oh yeah, that's enough to put me to sleep at night. But I promise you it's more than that. Yes, it does have policies about taking the ARE, policies about your behavior while taking the exam, information on getting an accommodation to test. However, it's not just about those policies and the boring reading. There is some really good stuff in here. And specifically, we get the question all the time, well, what do the divisions of the exam cover? What kind of content is in the division? Well, good news for you. Inside of our guidelines, we actually break down by objective and content area for each of our 6 divisions, the content you're going to see on your exam. And then also we go a step further and tell you what percentage of that content will actually be on your division. So an example here at the top right of the screen, this is an objective from the project development and documentation division. We're actually telling you this is the objective that you're going to be assessed on, and 5 to 9% of your exam is going to be on that topic. So if you have a 100-item exam, that's 5 to 9 questions. And so we're providing that information to you all. So if you want to understand the content of the ARE, go to our guidelines and start navigating, flipping through, reviewing that document. Now, as far as, well, what resources do I study to build sort of competence to learn about the different objectives? Luckily, again, we have a great reference list that's located in the back of the document. And you'll see a screenshot of it there in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. We're actually telling you what reference books are frequently used by our volunteer architect item writers as they author items for the ARE. So this is straight to the source. This is where the information is coming from that is used to author examination items. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this list, it's not exhaustive. However, we are providing you the primary, and then you'll see there's supplemental resources used by our item writers. So it's an excellent place to go and look, see the books that are used to write examination items, and then check your library. Many of these books are academically used at architecture programs across the country. And I would be willing to bet that you probably have some of them within your personal library that you can use when preparing for the ARE. Emily talked about building that support structure and finding those around you that can help you throughout the process. And that just doesn't go as, you don't have to think of it as in-person interactions. Even if maybe you're an individual, you're like, yeah, I really don't want to connect with someone on Zoom, or I really don't want to connect with someone in person in the office. I'm more of the type of person that wants to have the social media or online forum type relationships with a study group. That's absolutely fine. And luckily, we have the ARE 5.0 community. It has thousands of testers, just like you all, that are here on this webinar, that are going through the same process. They're having some similar struggles. And so you can go here and you can post your questions. You can get feedback. If you're struggling with understanding a piece of content from the exam, meaning a specific objective, you can post and ask for help. Now, with that said, be very careful when you're using these online forums to not disclose or talk specifics about exam content that you did see during your exam. However, it's a good place to have sort of a virtual online community that can be very helpful and encouraging throughout the process. So take advantage of this. You'll see the URL up on the presentation here. Don't worry about writing it down. It's also linked from our website. In 2022, NCARB released full-length practice exams for each of the 6 divisions of the ARE. And why we were really excited about these at NCARB is because these exams, these practice exams, were written in the exact same way that the actual exam is written. So we use the same group of volunteer architect item writers using the exact same item writing standards, using the exact same test specification and form assembly rules to assemble these. So they are the closest representation that you can get actually taking the exam today in a test center. You're going to see these in our ARE practice exams. Now, these are available for free for anyone who has eligibilities to test, or you are a licensure candidate. You can access them through your NCARB record. And so what we've done at NCARB is we analyze a lot of data. And after we released these in 2022, we've been looking at the data, specifically comparing those candidates who use this resource versus those candidates who don't use this resource. And when we compare the two, candidates who are using these divisional practice exams to prepare for their actual exam are performing 15% better on their actual exam, which is a significant difference. But I want to encourage you all to use this resource. When we also look at the data, we know that only 80% of candidates today are actually even using these free practice exams, and they're free. And looking at the data, the likelihood of you passing, there's a 15% increase in performance. So please use these. We'd like to see that 80% maybe go up to 90%. Hopefully one day all candidates are using these to prepare for their exam, but they're an excellent resource. Please take advantage of them. When it comes to your firm, firms can be an excellent support as you're going through the process. For me personally, granted, I went through this process over a decade ago, but at the time, my firm, when I asked, they provide financial support for my exams and also help me with study resources. That was excellent. It took some financial burden off of me going through the process. And also there were others in the firm that were going through the process that I was able to study with, and super helpful. Now, Emily, I know you probably had a similar experience. Do you want to talk about if your firm supported you as you were going through the process?
They did. They were very supportive. I was actually the first person to get licensed as an architect while working at the firm. And so they had previously paid for engineers, and I said, well, if you're paying for engineers, you should pay for me too. And they did. So I was reimbursed for test fees if I passed them. I did get a little bit of help with study assistance, and the time that I went to take that I didn't have to take PTO for. I got testing time as well.
Anything else, Emily?
No.
Okay.
I think I'm gonna wrap it up from here though, right?
Okay. Well, the key takeaway on this slide, ask your firm for support.
Yes.
The worst thing they can say is no, but we know based on our data that firms do provide support to many candidates, and many firms do that. So please ask. And Emily, go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, so make sure you're making that plan. Don't try and do it alone. Seek guidance and support. Make sure you're using our resources. And if you need help from us, we really are here. We've had the team on today answering your questions in the Q&A box. You can always email or call us. If you see me out and about, stop me and I'll answer your question on the spot too.
And I think that concludes our slides, Jenny. So I think we'll pass it over to you to open up. And it looks like there's been some Q&A flying in as we are going through the slides. So looking forward to answering some of those questions.
Yeah, thank you both so much for that presentation. And we have about 30 minutes left to dive into some of this Q&A. For those of you who are putting your questions in, thank you. We'll get to as many as we can. But if we don't get to answer your question today, you can always reach out to us online at ncarb.org/contact. And a recording of this webinar will be available on YouTube after we're done. So with that, let's dive into the Q&A. Our first question: do you have any advice for Bachelor of Architecture students who are working to figure out if licensure is the right path for them? I feel like you could both answer this question, but Emily, we'll start with you.
There's a lot that goes into that question. And one of the things is, where are you located? If you're in a state that you wouldn't have to go back for your master's, then potentially just keep working. And if you're really enjoying it, then keep going. And especially when you get to that point where tests are all you have left, you can do this. They are rigorous tests, but it's worth it. Put the capstone on there, and it really is just a launching platform for the rest of your career. As far as totally whether it's right for me or not, or should I go back to grad school or not, or should I get licensed in a state where I don't have to, and then get reciprocal licensure in the state where I live and work. There's lots of factors that go into that for every individual. But I will head it off with, I have yet to meet a person who went through the process and said, "Ah, man, I wasted my time getting my license." So.
And Jenny, I actually agree with everything Emily just said. Well said, Emily. There's a lot to consider. And I think for me personally, thinking about it, I did a 4-year Bachelor of Science in Architecture. And I'm assuming, Jenny, this is a pre-professional degree we're talking about here, unaccredited by NAB. We'll go forward with that since, Emily, that's the way you were answering it. For me, when I made the decision to go to grad school, is because I knew I wanted to be an architect. And I knew within the state, at the time I was in Indiana, and I knew that was a requirement within the state of Indiana. So I knew I wanted to be an architect. That was my goal. And so to pursue those goals, for me personally, it was I got the Master of Architecture, and that allowed me to become a licensed architect. And I think it's to sit back and reflect on what are your long-term goals. If they are, you want to be an architect, you want to have that stamp, you want to say, I have accomplished this. Just like Emily said, then maybe the MArch program is for you. Now, the advantage of going back to an MArch and getting to a NAB accredited program is you are now going to have ultimate flexibility to go anywhere within the 55 jurisdictions. You're not going to run into a situation where a jurisdiction says, we know you got a license in this other jurisdiction that didn't require that, but we require it here. So you don't have to get that degree from an NAB accredited program, but no, down the road, you could be limited in how you practice architecture and your ability to get reciprocal licensure across state lines. Emily, I'm thinking of another thing here is also the type of firm you're in. If you're you're telling me you're in a really large firm and you're like, I love this firm, I am going to die at this firm. And you know you're never going to stamp a drawing at that firm. Maybe that's part of your consideration. However, if you're an individual that says, you know what, I'm working at a large firm today, but I would really like to be a sole practitioner, open my own LLC one day, I do my own thing. I don't want to report to anyone. I don't want a boss telling me he or she doesn't like my design. Then maybe getting that license and getting that MArch would be beneficial. So I think there's a lot to consider in all of this. So yeah, Emily, I'm just basically saying similar to what you said would be it's really you have to really reflect on it as an individual and find out and really discover what your ultimate goal is.
I will also throw in there though that there are many reasons to get licensed over and above stamping drawings. There are plenty of architects out there who have never stamped a single drawing in their life, but the license was still worth pursuing.
It's a great credential to have. Emily and I both work at NCARB. I don't know about you, Emily, but I'm not practicing architecture anymore. But this credential, the idea that I made it through, I spent 6 years in school, completed the process. It makes you feel good in the end. And so I think that's, like you said, Emily, something to consider, the gratification of completing the process. And it is a credential that you can carry on for the rest of your career, regardless if you're stamping a drawing or not. So I agree with that.
All right, thank you both. And I'll just note, because I saw a question about it earlier, the both of you mentioned having a master's degree in architecture from a NAB accredited program. And Nick, you just mentioned non-NAB accredited 4-year degree programs, but I do want to make a note for our viewers that there are NAB accredited Bachelor of Architecture degrees as well. So you don't necessarily have to have a NAB accredited Master of Architecture degree if you're going the NAB accredited route. All right, our next question, Nick, I think this one is for you. How many times can a candidate take the same ARE division?
Oh yeah, it's a good question. I think so let's say I go into a test center today and I take the practice management division of the ARE and I'm unsuccessful. I can take that division 2 more times within 1 year. So basically think of it this way. If you take a 12-month window, you can have 3 attempts at any division within that 12-month period of time. Now, Jenny, if I was staying at it for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, hopefully no one will have to do that. We don't cap the maximum number of attempts you can have in an exam over time. We only have a policy that says 3 times within a 12-month period of time. And really important to know that doesn't reset on January 1st. It's not 1 calendar year, it's a 12-month period. So you can have 3 attempts within that period. Now, when you do fail a division, one other thing to note is you do have to wait 60 days before retesting as well.
All right, thanks, Nick. Emily, here's one for you. So there's a setting O opportunity under the AXP where you can do work for a pre-approved NCARB nonprofit. Can you talk, not an pre-NCARB approved nonprofit, not an NCARB nonprofit. Can you talk a little bit about that experience opportunity and also how a nonprofit would go about getting NCARB approved?
Yes, so I always struggle with the letters, so let's see if I can get it right. Community-based design center collaborative is the full thing. So a lot of times those will be Freedom by Design chapters that are connected with an AIAS chapter, but it doesn't have to be. This is your opportunity to do some pro bono design work, and that means that you will be working on some volunteer options. And the reason it has to be pre-approved by NCARB is that we want to make sure that it really is a nonprofit that you're doing the work for. And then the work also does have to qualify in what kind of work you're doing. So it does need to be related to planning or architecture itself. So planning, building, architecture. Research in architecture, unfortunately, does not qualify, and sometimes we'll get things like kiosks that are right on the border that usually don't qualify. But if you're looking at, a system of kiosks and how a whole park can be put together, then maybe that would fall into the planning category. So that is definitely an option. In order to get your organization registered for that, there is a link in the AXP guidelines. There's a landing page that talks about all of the things that nonprofit would need to meet, all of the things that your project would need to meet, and then the process of getting that started as well.
Thank you. All right, Nick, is there a time frame that candidates have to have completed the exam in?
Oh yeah, great question. Many of you on this webinar today, you probably recall NCARB's rolling clock. That was a policy that NCARB had in effect for many years. And so as of last year, NCARB is technically in the process of sunsetting the rolling clock. However, it's important to understand that that's a jurisdiction level decision. And so the rolling clock used to say that a candidate, when they got their first pass, they had to pass all their divisions within a 5-year period. NCARB's analysis of all the data behind that, we decided in our board of directors to sunset that rolling clock requirement. Instead, we have a score validity policy. And I'll tell you a little bit about what that is in a minute. And I want to cover one more aspect of the rolling clock. So when NCARB made the decision to sunset the rolling clock, we had to work with our jurisdictions, the licensing boards, to make sure it was removed from their regulations. So at this point, and Jenny, you can correct me if I'm wrong, out of our 55 licensing boards, I believe 53 no longer have a rolling clock requirement. There are 2 jurisdictions, Illinois and South Dakota. I believe Illinois is officially going to be gone January 1 of 2025. And NCARB is in the process of working with South Dakota to get their rolling clock retired as well, too. So for most of you on this call today, there is no longer a rolling clock that you have to worry about when you're taking your exams. However, the score validity policy, Jenny, I'll talk a little bit about that, because that's what we replace the rolling clock policy with. Basically, what the score validity policy says is that when you take a division of the ARE, so our current version of the ARE is 5.0, any pass in ARE 5.0 for a division is valid for that version of the exam and the next version of the exam. So if I was to take and pass a division of the ARE for 5.0, that will stay valid through ARE 6.0. It will not retire until ARE 7.0 is when that would expire. So we believe this is a better policy that's more reflective of the pace of change within the practice of architecture. And you can find more information if you go to our ARE guidelines. We actually have a section that talks about our score validity policy, and it'll give you a couple of examples, because I would imagine some of you on this webinar as well too probably have credits from ARE 4.0 and you're wondering when they expire. They would actually expire when the exam moves from ARE 5.0 to 6.0. So always think about it, a credit is good for 2 versions of the ARE.
All right, thanks, Nick. Emily, a similar question but for the AXP. Once you've reported your experience hours in my NCARB, do they ever expire? And is there a time frame that you have to complete the AXP in?
So a lot of you have probably seen our reporting requirement, which is that when you're reporting hours for AXP, they need to be reported within 8 months for full credit, and then 5 years for half credit after that. However, once you have submitted the report and clicked the submit button, it is in our system and it does not expire. So it does still need to be approved by your supervisor, or depending on the experience opportunity, whoever the approver is needs to acknowledge that report. However, again, it's based on when you turn it in. It is not based on when they report it. So we've sometimes seen supervisors take quite a while to approve those reports, but that is still going to give you full credit based on when you turned it in. And even if something happens, life goes and your record lapses for a little bit, when you bring it back online, it'll still be there.
Thank you. Nick, question for you. In terms of the exam, is there a recommended order to take the divisions in?
The infamous recommended order question. I know everyone doesn't want to hear this, but it really depends on your individual situation. And when I describe that, I mean, where are you at in your AXP? What's your experience within the firm? And then you can sort of make an informed decision about that. So I'll use Emily. I'm going to use you as an example here. Let's say Emily's working at a firm. Emily graduated last year, and the only thing Emily has worked on in the firm is construction administration. So she's been making site visits, reviewing submittals, responding to RFIs. And Emily is actually finished with all of her, she's built competencies in all the AXP tasks, and she's completed her hours. It probably wouldn't be wise for Emily then to go over and take her first exam, practice management as an example, if Emily doesn't have any experience doing that within a firm. Now, you might look at the way NCARB orders our exams and all our materials, and you're like, wait a minute, Nick, it always says practice management first. You don't have to follow that order. And what's really interesting, when we at NCARB look at our data over 2023, practice management had more exam deliveries than any other division. And it's really fascinating to know why, because typically to get the experience in the practice management area, it's more difficult within firms, especially if you're at a larger firm. So I think the best thing that you can do is sit down, look at where you're at with your AXP in each of the 6 different practice areas, and then make an informed decision. One more part of that, which I can also share, and Jenny actually didn't talk about this at the beginning, but Jenny and our marketing communications team, she does a lot of work with our data. And what's interesting is when we started analyzing exam success rates, we see that candidates have the most success 0 to 3 months after completing the corresponding AXP practice area. So if Emily, let's say today finishes construction evaluation, our data is saying candidates do the best between today and 3 months from now. So we're into October. That's what the data tells us. So I think you can find that information. It's actually on NCARB's website, NCARB by the numbers 2024. But to summarize, look at where you're at in AXP, open up the ARE guidelines and look at the content within the 6 different divisions. And then the division that you feel comfortable with, you feel like you've earned, you've completed the tasks, you've built competencies, you feel confident in your knowledge, I would say take that exam division first. And then use that same sort of decision-making process as you map out your path through all the exam divisions. Please do not take practice management first just because it's listed first and the way we list the exam divisions. I know you're smiling, Jenny, but candidates can take the divisions in any order. They can start construction evaluation and work backwards. They can start with programming and analysis. So make an informed decision. That would be my recommendation.
Thanks, Nick. All right. Our next question, and maybe Emily, you can answer this one. Is there a difference between going to work directly after graduating from your bachelor's degree versus going straight into getting your master's degree? Do we have any recommendations on that front?
Well, I mean, I think you can hear from both of us that one of us did one and one of us did the other. And I think we've, you know, eventually both ended up in the same place. So, quite literally. But for me, just life and my family and how that shaped up, it did not make sense for me to go directly from undergrad to grad school. I don't regret that. Do I think maybe I could have gotten things done faster? Yes. Do I think maybe it would have been easier if I'd gotten through testing before I had 2 kids to also worry about? Probably. But at the same time, I did it and I got it done. So, you know, it's not a race and your path is your path.
Thank you. Nick, slightly easier question. When can candidates start taking the exam?
A little bit easier of a question, Jenny. Typically for most jurisdictions, it's when you fulfill their education requirements. Now I say typically because there are some states where you'll have to submit an application to get your eligibilities open, or there'll be some sort of other requirement. What I recommend is go over to our licensing requirements tool on NCARB's webpage, and there's a box, I believe it says early eligibility to the ARE, and you'll be able to then look through the jurisdictions and see what the eligibility criteria are within that jurisdiction. But typically, for most jurisdictions, it's fulfilling their education requirement.
Thanks. Our next question, we have quite a lot of questions from international applicants here today. Emily, can experience earned outside of the United States count toward the AXP?
I'm going to give that a qualified yes. Often it can, but there are some qualifications that need to be met for that first. So we've talked a lot about divisions already, but I don't think we've talked about settings per se yet. So within the AXP, there are 2 settings, which is how you get the experience. And so if you're working directly at an architecture firm in the US and the person who's licensed at the firm who's supervising your work, their license is from a US or Canadian jurisdiction, then that is what we call setting A. And then setting O is for other, and so those are other opportunities. If you are working and doing architecture abroad, and there is someone at the firm who is legally practicing architecture in that place with either concurrently or solely a license in the US or Canada, then it can still count as setting A because you have someone from the US who is supervising that work. If you are working for someone who is licensed to practice architecture, they're legally practicing architecture where they are in whatever country you are in, then that can be counted in setting O under practice under other licensed professionals. And that is going to be the highest cap for any of the setting O categories. Sometimes people say, oh, you can only get half of your experience in that area. That doesn't mean that that counts for 50%. It still counts for the full amount of credit. It just, at some point, you'll reach the maximum limit of what you can apply in that category. There are some other small nuances on case-by-case basis, but that's the general outline.
Thank you. Nick, question for you. When will candidates find out if they passed or failed an exam attempt?
Yeah, good question. So at the end of your exam administration, what you're going to see is you're going to be given an option to view provisional feedback, is what we call it. And there'll be two buttons, one in the lower left-hand corner, one in the right-hand corner. One will be blue, one will be red. One will say yes, view feedback. The other will say no. So you will be able to view your feedback on your performance instantly as soon as your exam is over. Now, one thing to note about that feedback is it is provisional. However, it is fully accurate because the ARE is scored by a computer. So it is giving you your fully accurate score. However, what happens to that score at that point is NCARB does forensic data analysis on all exam scores to look for any sort of testing anomalies, security concerns, inconsistencies, anything that might throw a red flag that there was some sort of security concern or anomaly with the exam administration. That process typically takes around a week. As soon as that process is complete, your score is then validated, and then you're provided an official score report, which Jenny is provided 7 to 10 days after an exam administration.
All right, thank you. Another exam-related question. We've all heard stories from candidates who took an online proctored exam and had some technical difficulties. Are there any strategies that candidates can use to avoid experiencing those technical difficulties?
Yes, absolutely. Strategy one, download the guidelines and look at the technology setup for taking an online proctored exam. So, and I know that will only take you so far. And luckily what NCARB also does is we have worked out with PSI that then you can schedule a free test run, is what we're calling it, where you can actually schedule a live appointment with a PSI proctor where you go into the same security screening, check-in procedures, systems checks to make sure everything's working. So Jenny, what I would recommend is look at the guidelines, get all your technology set up, then schedule a test run with PSI to confirm that it's all working with a live proctor. And actually, when you take that test run, there are a few sample questions that you can just click through to become familiar with the interface and all that. Now, if you run into an issue when you're going through the test run, the beauty of the test run is then you can work with PSI to resolve whatever the technical issue is, and then you can go back to your NCARB record, schedule another test run to confirm that everything was addressed. So really two-part. Set up based on the guidelines, schedule a test run. If you need a second test run, go ahead and schedule that as well to make sure all your technology is working.
All right. And then here's a more advice-based question for both of you. So a lot of candidates experience maybe pitfalls or challenges or failures along the path to licensure. How did the two of you stay motivated while you were working to earn your license, especially if you faced a failure? And Emily, we'll start with you.
I think one of the big things was that I know, so I did face a failure on an exam, and for me that was like, you know, I've always been top of my class, like never struggled academically. So that was like, wait, what happened? What is this? And I think if I had not had my support system around me, it could have derailed me for much longer than it did. But as afraid as I was to tell people that I failed, the support that I got of, that's okay, you'll get it next time. You're gonna do this. We believe in you. I didn't feel judged at all. I just felt supported. And so it was a really good way for me to get back on track and keep going. And, you know, once the 60-day wait period was up, I got back on the horse and I did it again and I passed. And so it was, I know that I hear people all the time who are like, well, I don't want to tell people I'm testing because then I'll have to tell them if I failed. And from my own experience, I don't recommend taking that route. I say, you know, if you have to tell people you failed, that's okay, because then you have support instead of wallowing in it by yourself.
I'll keep it brief. I mostly, yeah, Emily, agree with everything you said about the support structure. I'll add two things. A lot of people fail the exam and they go on to have really successful careers as architects. It's not uncommon for individuals to fail a division and move on and become a successful architect. So one thing to know in this, Emily, connecting with the support group, you're not alone when you experience a failure, and having a support group will help encourage you and help you overcome that failure and keep moving forward. The one thing I'll add additional to that is establish a goal. If you establish a goal and you write down that goal that you want to be a licensed architect and you stay focused on that, that will help you stay focused on what that ultimate, what you're shooting for, what you're going for. And so support network and then have a goal. And I think that'll help you and know you're not alone. I think that's the third thing I'll add there. So.
Thank you. All right, well, we're getting really close to the end of our time here today. So before we close, I'll ask each of you to share a key takeaway. And for our viewers, thank you so much for coming today. I know there's still a lot of questions unanswered in the chat. So if we didn't get to yours, remember you can contact us online or on the phone and we'll answer your question. And now I'll go back to Emily and Nick for your key takeaway. Nick, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. Use our resources. I know you heard me say this during the slides, and I think for us at NCARB, specifically someone who works on the exam every day, we see the success candidates are having that are using our divisional practice exams. And I think for us, then we see the number that only 80% of candidates are using them. Please use them. They will be helpful. And it's not just the practice exam. Use all our resources. We have we're doing these NCARB lives monthly. We're placing videos on our YouTube channel. We have guidelines on our websites. I know it's easy to look at them and dismiss NCARB resources and say, you know what, I'm going to go over to some third-party test prep, whatever it may be. But I promise you, you will not regret using our resources, specifically the ARE practice exams. Use those, and hopefully the next time we have this webinar, our usage, Jenny, goes from 80% to 90%. So use the resources that NCARB provides you all. That's my key takeaway.
And mine would be, don't just let things happen to you. Make an active plan and go for it.
All right. Thank you, Emily and Nick, for all of your wisdom today. And thanks to our behind-the-scenes NCARB staff answering questions in the Q&A. And thank you all to our viewers for joining us today. We hope we were able to answer your questions and you picked up some tools and advice that can help you on your path to licensure. If you couldn't see the entire webinar, a recording will be available on our YouTube channel later today or tomorrow. And again, you can contact us online at www.ncarb.org/contact. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon.